the first round pick that shocked the world.
This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
To the Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste, and joining me are Jarvis Davis, Aaron Freeman, and Tori McElhaney. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. I have a competitive side, and it's a big fan of Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. Join your friends and download Monopoly Go today, now free on the App Store or Google Play. And the Atlanta Football Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The 2024 NFL Draft officially came to a close for the Atlanta Falcons Saturday. We'll talk about the 7 picks that made us feel better, maybe. Then we'll talk about the best and maybe worst of the draft overall. But first, we got to run it back to the first round. So Jarvis, let's start here. Last week's show, we talked about an ESPN report that the Falcons were thinking of taking Michael Penix Jr. at 8, right?
Sure.
Knew the Falcons flew all the way to Seattle with a full contingent to meet with Penix for about 3 hours. So the tea leaves kind of said this would happen. And for the 4th year in a row, the Falcons went with a skilled position player on offense. So first, let's go back to the psychologist's couch. And let me ask, Jarvis, what was your first reaction when you heard the pick?
My first reaction, let me tell you, let me get my wife down here and let her know, because she was upstairs in the room, put my girls to bed, and I was in the basement, and she heard my reaction. So yeah, it was the pick that shocked the world. Let me go out and say that. But just for them to go out and spend $100 million, just throw the whole bag at Kirk. Hey, Kirk, we love you, Kirk. Come on down, Kirk. Kirk being run out the Atlanta United games, Atlanta Braves games, Sunday night baseball in the booth. You know what I'm saying? Kicking it, talking about, we about to go ahead and do this thing. And then next thing you know, oh yeah, let's go ahead and draft your replacement as well. within a matter of 3 months. We're just like, what is going on here? So yeah, it was. Wow, I've kind of rationalized it a little bit better in my mind since then, of course, because as covering the Falcons and being a fan of this team, yeah, I have to do that. I have to rationalize a lot of things, decisions that they make, in my lifetime. But, it's just, but that initial reaction, oh my God, it was just like, oh, what, why, what's going on? Is everyone okay? Is somebody sick? Did somebody run the wrong card up there? Like, oh, we were just playing. Bring it back. We gotta lay a lot to right to. We're gonna go with Latu right here, and then y'all can go get Michael Penix. But yeah, I was just flabbergasted.
How about you, Aaron? I mean, I kind of know your reaction because, of course, we had to do the Locked On NFL show together. But let's run it back for the sake of our audience here. What was your first reaction after the pick of Michael Penix Jr. at 8?
Utter shock. I did a podcast the day before saying there's no chance they take a quarterback in the top 10. It caught me off guard.
What you get? So, Terry heard it too. He listens.
Yeah. So for me, you just look at the pick and clearly the Falcons were like, never again. We're not going to go back to quarterback purgatory ever again with the Kirk Cousins signing and taking the quarterback. And it's like, we will double down on that whole thing. But I was completely floored by it. I'm sure that I think it was on a live show. So there's probably a screenshot of me with wide eyes when I see what the pick is somewhere. So someone can use that as a meme or something like that.
How about you, Tori? What was your initial reaction?
I was like, oh man, the fans are going to come for me. They're not. I knew the perception of this pick. I mean, I think as soon as it was known, I was kind of just mentally preparing myself for here's the thing. And here's what a blanket statement. I don't make the pick and I work for the team. I don't make the pick. Same thing goes the other way. Things that I say are not the things that the front office are truly putting pen to paper and being like, oh, Tori said this, we're going to do this. So I want to make sure that people know, don't come for my throat. I work for the team, and I am really, truly like trying to see all sides of this, because I have a responsibility to the team and I also have a responsibility to the fan base. So to feel both of those things that over the last weekend has kind of been at war with each other a little bit. I think there have been a lot of people who have come around to it and understood it as time has gone on. I mean, not having that like initial knee-jerk reaction to it. I think that's all pretty normal. All the emotions, all these feelings, I think are pretty normal. But I kind of just hang my hat on something that Jarvis said, and this is something that I wrote immediately after the pick came in, was that they didn't want to make the same mistake twice. And, you know, I asked Terry that in the first round press conference, and, you know, he said, you know, it's not necessarily like that. You always have to look at quarterbacks, and we really like Michael Penix. And while I understand that, I do think that there is something to be said about the fact that when the Matt Ryan era in Atlanta came to an end, there were 2 seasons between where we are now and where we were then, where there was some of the most inconsistent quarterback play across the league. And the fact of the matter is I think the Falcons very much did not want to make that mistake again. They wanted to give Kirk Cousins something that Matt Ryan didn't have in his twilight years in the league, which was a successor. And that doesn't mean that Matt Ryan would have been okay with that. It doesn't mean that Kirk Cousins should be okay with that. It just means that this is a business, and this is a business decision, and something that they're trying to set themselves up for future stability that they haven't had the last 2 years. And that's how I think we can rationalize it.
Yeah. And I think, to your point, you have to be objective about it. I know for me, I kind of got excited once I like settled down and kind of chuckled to myself, like, but you knew this was going to happen, Tenitra. Like, you knew this was going to happen. Didn't you kind of go through this mental exercise of preparation that there was not going to be a defensive player that was selected at 8? And that's what kind of helped me to level set. I had to go back to what we talked about days before the pick. We talked about this. This was told to us to prepare for this. So you should have been prepared for it. And I think the second thing is, if we're real talk, the reports have said that there were a couple of teams that were trying to potentially jump up to get Penix. And if he's your guy, meaning out of that first 6, right? And he's the one that you think is the fit here, and the rest of them are essentially off the board, then you're not going to wait. And you don't think that you're going to get him with your 43rd pick, or even trading back up into the first round. Well, you do have a decision to make. And if you think that trading back into the first round, you're going to get that true place of need, which is on the defensive side of the ball, then you kind of do what you have to do. So yeah, I think you guys are right. After the initial reaction, then you have thoughts about why the team went in that direction, in all, you know, whether it was a decision that was made internally, whether there were some external factors, or all points in between. But I do think, real talk as well, you do have to think about how this is going to potentially affect, I don't even want to say the locker room. I'd say just the QB room, honestly, Free, because yes, Michael Penix Jr. said Kirk Cousins and he spoke. The conversation went really well. But if the pattern of succession was also similar to a template that was created in Green Bay, we all know that that was not a smooth transition. That was a rocky time between Brett Favre and Aaron Rodgers. So my question would then be, Free, you know, that's still an issue that Raheem Morris is going to have to contend with. How do you see them kind of managing through this situation so that it doesn't become or remain an issue going forward?
Yeah, I think that's going to be the difficult thing. I know me and Jarvis talked about that one of the nights, either Thursday or Friday. They all blur together. But, you know, if anybody is going to be able to handle this, you would bet on Raheem Morris being able to handle this. But, like, it's going to be a thing. Like, whether it should be a thing, but it's going to be a thing at some point in the future where, you know, there's going to be, at least I know among the fan base, you know, whether that's with the team, we'll see. But, with the fan base, there is going to be a push-pull between, you know, who should be the quarterback, Kirk Cousins or Michael Penix. You know, maybe not this year, but I bet good money it will definitely be a thing next year at the latest. And so that's going to be something that Raheem is going to manage. And the easiest way to manage it is if the team is winning, no one's going to sit here and second guess who the quarterback is. But every game that the Falcons lose, every game that Kirk Cousins throws an interception in it. Like I remember this when Matt Ryan was here. Like whenever the Falcons would lose and Matt Ryan would throw a pick in a game, you would go on Twitter or wherever else, and you would see all this like Matt Ryan cost us the game, even if that wasn't true at all. And now
Dominic
that
Davis, bring him in.
you have Michael Penix here, like that's going to be a thing again, and is not just going to be the fans, it's going to be the media. It's going to be a talking point for the next couple of years, and it's up to Raheem Morris to sort of handle that thing. I think he's capable of doing it, but the easiest way to handle that is if you just win games, then people will stop asking questions, I guess.
And I think the main thing too, Free, let's talk about the similarities to another quarterback, back in the day, right? His name is Michael. He throws left-handed, he has a big arm, you know what I'm saying? Kind of stops right there, just
He
from
had
an
Vic
athletic.
cleats growing up.
Right. I know, that's what I'm saying. So it's so typical at Atlanta, right? Because even if Green Bay can get away with it, because they're in that market, the fan base trusts them, right? Even though there was a certain subset of fans that were absolutely going nuts when they drafted Jordan Love, but eventually they came around on it, right? And you hope that that's the case here in Atlanta, but because they even evoked, Green Bay, when talking about, why they did this and how it kind of turned out. But I think that the similarities are just very interesting to me. And then, like Free said, let Kirk start stinking it up. There's going to be a certain subset in this fan base going to be like, hey, man, y'all drafted him. Y'all said this the dude, that's the future. If Kirk keeps thinking it up like this, we want to see the young kid, because people want to have hope, because it's time out for this team not being able to win a division and get into the playoffs. Hence the whole Kirk Cousins signing. But if you tell me that this guy's was the best player available, right? People don't want to mention that. Like, hey, they felt like this was the best player available at 8. And it's a quarterback. Yeah, man. Like, it might be time for him to play a little bit sooner than you think.
I think something that Raheem said in one of the press conferences over the last few days was he made a comment. He was like, we don't want Kirk Cousins to be looking over his shoulder. And he won't be looking over his shoulder. And I think that is really difficult to do with the situation as it is.
Yeah.
When there is a number 8 overall pick that's sitting right behind you. It's not like the Falcon. I think it maybe would have been a different feeling if the Falcons would have gone back up into the first to grab him, or would have gotten him in the second round pick. But that's not the case. They stuck to where their guns at number 8 and said, this is the guy we're going and getting. And that talking about what Raheem Morris needs to manage, it's that. But also, I think that there is a little bit of, hope that you can have in that sometimes when there's someone right behind you, it makes you run faster and it makes you play better. It makes you, I hate using like the cliches of it, but that's true. There is a certain extent. We're all competitive human beings. And on this call, if we're talking about an NFL quarterback, we're talking about Kirk Cousins. Take that competitiveness and times it by 15. And that's where you can probably find him. So
Aaron Rodgers won an MVP off of it.
Right, exactly.
So they draft.
So when there's competition infused in it, when you get that mindset of like, you know what, like, screw it, I'm going to go out and I'm going to show you, hey, you made the wrong decision. I'm your guy and I'm your guy for the next 3 years. Maybe this is something or 4 years. Maybe this is something that truly benefits someone like Kirk Cousins, where it's not just like you feel comfortable. You don't always get your best when you're comfortable. You oftentimes can sometimes get your best when you're uncomfortable. So I don't know, but it's up to how Kirk Cousins responds to it. It's up to Raheem Morris to lead his guys in a way that's healthy. I mean, there's a lot of like social dynamics at play with this.
Yeah, well, the return of Raheem Morris was supposed to be about the fact that there was a maturation that was seen by the leadership in Flowery Branch, and this is definitely going to test his mettle and maturity. When we come back, we'll talk about the reset to defense in the later rounds in the deep dive. This episode of the Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by FanDuel and GameTime. It's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Baseball's in full swing, and FanDuel is your place to bet on every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. It's $150 win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks. And if you watched that game last night where the Wolves closed out on the Suns and you bet on slam dunks for Anthony Edwards, that was a winner for you. Now it's all on the FanDuel app, and it's safe, it's secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is also brought to you by GameTime. GameTime is now an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA, which makes getting playoff tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the GameTime app actually go down the closer it gets to the tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guaranteed, GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. They also, with those last-minute deals, those are priority tickets. You can save up to 60% off buying them for sports, concerts, comedy, and theater, and your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Terms do apply, but download that GameTime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, guys, the Falcons made a pivot for the next 7 selections, but I think the most important, intriguing, interesting picks for everyone was, of course, those 5 defensive players that the Falcons selected in those later rounds. So, Tori, of the Falcons' final 7 selections, which one do you think will have an immediate impact?
So I go back and forth between Ruke, Orhorhoro, and Bralen Trice. Are y'all laughing at me?
Why you say it like that?
I had to get it right. I had to get the right amount of rows in there.
1, 2, 3.
I counted in my head. I was like, row. Yep, that's it. And Bralen Trice.
Yes.
No, but seriously, I think like those are the 2 picks that if you look at the whole entire draft class in totality, those are the 2 that I think you expect to come out. Aaron, are you still laughing?
We had a whole conversation before we recorded, so it's just hilarious.
So you ran that back in your head for a second.
Can't keep it together.
So we're back.
Yes,
So
yes.
Those are the 2 that I think when the draft really starts for the Falcons, if you're talking about 2024, starts right there with those 2. I think those 2, along with somebody like a JD Bertrand, I know that he obviously has Nate Landman in front of him, Troy Anderson in front of him, Caden Ellis in front of him, but I feel like he adds a really cool 4th piece to that group. But with Ruke and Tralen specifically, those are 2 guys that should be competing for starting spots, let alone, I mean, they're immediately inserted into significant rotational play. Because as we've seen with what Ryan Nielsen did with the Falcons defensive front, there was a lot of rotation there because he was really big on keeping guys fresh. You know, Grady Jarrett and David Onyemata, they're not 23-year-olds anymore. And even though they're still playing at an incredibly high level, and if y'all think that Grady Jarrett isn't going to come back for year 10 after a season-ending injury last year and want to destroy people, like, no, like he'll be fine. These guys are fine. But you have to make sure that there's not a significant drop-off when those guys are no longer in the rotation. So I don't know exactly how Jimmy Lake is going to do his rotation up front, but I would imagine just by the nature of who you have, it would be a pretty significant rotation similar to what we saw last year in order to keep guys fresh. So those are 2 guys specifically that I think you're going to see immediately inserted, and you hope they have immediate production, especially someone like Ruke, who you go up into the 2nd round at 35 to get. You give away a pick in order to get him. So that's what you're hoping for. And so those 2 I think are really, really important.
And so, Aaron, what Tori just mentioned kind of goes into another question that we were asking as well. So why don't you go ahead and combine those two also with looking at who you expect to maybe be immediately inserted or will have that immediate impact, kind of part one of that question. But then part two of that question is then who might that put potentially on the hot seat as far as, hey, you better step up your game this season?
Yeah, I think Tori nailed it with the rotation conversation with, 4 guys in the front. We saw last year early in the season where the Falcons were just constantly like churning guys, like who are the D tackles? It's Albert Huggins one week, it's Daquan Graham the other week, it's Laquale London another week. And, that was a big part because they needed to keep guys like Grady Jarrett and David Onyema fresh. And we saw those guys kind of wear down. Obviously, Grady suffered his season-ending injury midway through the season. David Onyema, the turf monster in New York, got him, and he was dealing with some issues at the end of the year. And so boosting that rotation, I think, to keep those guys fresher now that they're coming off those injuries, now that they're a year older, makes a ton of sense. So I expect Ruke, I expect Brandon Dorless, I expect Bralen Trice to be a part of the regular rotation. How many snaps they get, a lot of that depends on how quickly they hit the ground running in training camp, and whether or not guys like, to answer your second question, T, Taquan Graham and Zach Harrison, and where are those guys at, right? I would imagine Zach Harrison probably stacks a little higher on the depth chart just because of the draft capital that they invested in him last year in the 3rd round pick. Compare that to Taquan Graham, who was a 5th round pick, who played really well in 2022, but then got hurt. Wasn't as effective, I think, last year. And so I think you do wonder a little bit about whether or not he bounces back and looks like the 2022 version of him, where we saw a lot of promise in him versus the 2023 version. And that's one of those players that I think could get sort of lost in the shuffle, as well as veterans like Kentavious Street and Laquale London, with this sort of influx of youth along the defensive line. But yeah, I think it's going to be a very interesting camp battles with all of those guys in terms of how they stack the depth chart, who comes in, who has a good, first week of training camp that can sort of set the pace for that competition, and everybody else is sort of catching up.
Yeah, and I think that, overall, I feel like the pathway for Bralen Trice, I feel like he's the guy that can has opportunity just from about who's in front of him, right? We talking about outside linebacker, you talking about Arnold Ebiketie. We know he's not going to be competing against him because he's a 2nd round pick that they traded up for as well. They have a real thing for trading up in the 2nd round. Matthew Bergeron last year, might be a little trend here, right? They seem to get really aggressive in the 2nd round when it comes to certain players. But I think that Trice has the clear pathway to come in to be effective. And I think that, from a skill set standpoint, guy's relentless. I really like what he brings to the table. So I feel like that'll be the person that we're saying, looking back maybe halfway through the season, saying, oh, Trice wasn't a bad pick. I feel like he'll be that guy for this team. And as far as, guy who probably need to be on edge, I'm with you with Free. Taquan Graham, that's a very interesting one, because when you think about Ruke Orhorhoro, he's the guy that can play that defensive end / nose. Yeah, you like that, Aaron. You know what I'm saying? I'm on it, baby. Ruke Orhorhoro. Then you got Dorless as well, who has some edge and interior capabilities as well. So it don't look good. He needs to be back healthy, and be back like he was looking when he first came in, before he got hurt. That's the type of Taquan Graham that we need to see. We talk about people pushing certain people when people get drafted with Tori, with Kirk, him being motivated. Taquan Graham should be motivated because they loaded up at your spot. So yeah, you need to be on notice.
To your point too about, there is a theme in the defensive linemen that the Falcons went out and got in this draft class. They all played all across the defensive line at their respective college teams. And these aren't just guys who are just playing over the tackles or just playing at nose, just playing on the edge, just had their hand in the dirt, were just standing up. No, they did all of it. All of them, if you look at it. And they also, what I think is really interesting too, is that they went after different body types, which I thought was really intriguing. Like, Zion is not the same as Ruke, is not the same as Brandon, is not the same as Bralen. Like, all of these guys are built very differently. You have some tweeners in there. You have some big dudes in there. You have some length. You have some stockier guys. I mean, they really went after all of kind of the gambit of what you can expect to see from a defensive lineman. And I think that does nothing but help you when you do come down to what type of packages you put together and what a front could look like, whether it be, wow, that was very country of me.
I love it. Look,
Sometimes it pops
look.
out and it scares me a little bit. But no, you look across it and you insert it with Grady Jarrett, you insert it with Zach Harrison, you insert it with AK, Lorenzo, David, all of those guys. You have a very intriguing group that you can do a lot of different things with.
Yes, indeed. Now, the defensive moves the Falcons made, for the most part, seem like a good look, but there's one position where maybe something was left on the table. We'll talk about that in What's Next. This episode of the Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's so much good stuff in the game that we got to talk about it again. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, and hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies, and a ton of unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. There's always something fun and new to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench, go download it now, free on Google Play or the App Store, because game on. Okay, guys. So one thing I wanted to go back to, Aaron, because there was kind of one position that some found glaring that the Falcons did not address in the draft, and that is that of corner. So Terry Fontenot did say this, quote unquote, first of all, we'll definitely continue to look at cornerbacks. It's 24/7, 365. Once the draft ends, we're still going, whether we're talking about a possible trade, about signing another player, that goes right up into the season. But Aaron, are you confident the Falcons are going to find that guy who can finally bring some help for AJ Terrell, similarly to how they were able to sign Jesse Bates III to upgrade that safety room?
I don't know. I think you have Clark Phillips, you have Mike Hughes, you brought in Kevin King, you brought in Antonio Hamilton, you have 4 guys that have starting experience. Theoretically, you could throw all of those guys into a competition and say, may the best man win, and whoever emerges should be a halfway decent starter for you opposite AJ Terrell. Is that the long-term answer? Unless it's Clark Phillips, no, probably not. But we've had 4 years of AJ Terrell having a revolving door opposite of a corner. Why not make it 5? I guess at this point.
So to that note too, what's interesting is I always go back and think about what Raheem Morris or Terry Fontenot said at other points over the offseason to be like, were they like, foreshadowing some things when they talk to us? And what's funny is I go back to the combine when Raheem Morris made the comment to Taryn and I about, the medical grades and the medical evaluations that you see at the combine are what make or break your heart. I'm like, was he thinking about Michael Penix Jr.? And then for when we were at the owners' meetings, I specifically remember Raheem was asked about cornerback and about what it could look like this offseason and if they could go after some guys. And he said then he almost like doubled down on the guys that they have. And he brought up Clark, he brought up Mike Hughes, he brought up all of these guys that honestly, I think we kind of are a little bit more hesitant on. And he seemed extremely confident in the guys that they have in the room right now, which was a little bit shocking to me because I didn't necessarily think that going into this offseason. So it almost is like, was he preparing us even in owners meetings to be like, no, we're not going to draft a corner? I don't think that they went into this draft class being like, we're not going to draft a corner. I guarantee you they had a ton of information and a ton of grades on guys. I know for a fact, because Terry said it, they were trying to move back up into the first. They were trying to move around in the second and in the third. were cornerbacks the targets at that point in time? Maybe, potentially. I think that it's interesting, though, because you have one more year with AJ Terrell on his 5th-year deal. I tend to think that you try and keep him around long-term, similar to the way you did Chris Lindstrom last offseason or 2 off seasons ago. But at the same time, at some point, you want there to be that stability opposite him. You need that stability opposite him. Is it happening in 2024? Maybe not, because they prioritize other position groups. But I feel like at some point in the next year, that position has got to be answered, because it's kind of like the conversation we're having about left guard up until last year when they got Matthew Bergeron, and we saw what Matthew Bergeron was able to do at the position. At some point, opposite AJ Terrell is going to have to be hit head on, because it's been going on 5 years now that it's been a steady rotation.
Yeah, and you only had one kind of glimmer of hope, and then there was the injury, and there's Casey Hayward. But anyway, go ahead, Jarvis.
I think Tori, you're on to something, because I feel like Terry, Fondo drops a couple. Tori, the general manager of the Atlanta Falcons, according to X. So I think that he does drops a little bit of cheese, because I think after in the first round press conference, he, of course, answering a barrage of questions about Michael Penix and what was the thought process behind that. He mentioned, he's like, tomorrow we're going to look at some defensive players. We're going to want to get some good defensive players. And then he kind of paused for a second. And there's going to be some offensive players out there too. I was like, no, man, you can stop right there. No, just stop right there. Yeah. It's okay. They don't know who you want to get.
No, thank you.
Yeah, I was just like, so yeah, he does drop a little bit of cheese there. We just got to listen to pay attention. So yeah, I think that, given the situation, obviously wasn't surprised at all that they went that route. But, the whole cornerback piece, that's something they're going to have to address it, like Tori said.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. And, like I think what gives me a little bit of confidence or just a little bit of pause is really Jesse Bates III, because no one saw that coming. And some thought initially, oh, yeah, that's a high price to pay. But I mean, that paid off. That paid off in spades. So you just kind of hope that Terry Fontenot is able to hit again. And you just kind of hope that some of the tea leaves as well kind of come from what we saw with Raheem Morris in the Rams, just in their ability to kind of see where you can get quality players deep in the draft rounds. Obviously not for the corner position necessarily in the draft, but just if you take that same eye and you take that eye that Terry Fontenot had, and then you look at maybe you get somebody like a Casey Hayward once again, who doesn't fall to injury, and maybe that free agency route or, that trade route may be a viable option. So anywho, we'll wrap up with an interesting note, because to me, I chuckle. A friend of mine and ours, Randy McMichael, always says, how are you going to give grades and they haven't even taken a snap in the NFL? But it's just like list season. It's grade season. So we'll wrap up with grades. We'll start with you, Aaron. Grade for the overall 2024 draft class for the Falcons.
Well, my grade's going to be low. I give it a D+, just because I think a C draft is an average draft, right? I'll explain. Right. You need 2 starters. And I think the Falcons got some starters, but it's going to take some time for them to start. So I don't know. So I have to grade them a little no, but the plus is about the potential. This could turn out to be like a B+ draft, an A- draft, A+ draft in 5 years. But it's just like, again, I'm like Randy, like, we don't know what these guys are going to be. Ask me in 3 years what the grade is. Like 3 days later, it's like, I don't know.
I love it. What about you, Tori?
So considering I have to see Terry Fontenot and Kyle Smith in the hallways of Flowery Branch,
we're gonna go incomplete. Incomplete is a grade.
I'm gonna say that my grade is TBD. I'm with Jarvis. I'm kind of like, give me a couple of years. Let's see how these guys develop. Also, if I sit here and say, if I give them a grade and it gets back to Terry, I can just see the territory power hour that we have like going completely upside down. So I'm just going to reserve my right as a team employee to not grade the draft class.
I'm going to go with a J. Let me explain. A J
So
is
now a grade
Jay
2.
for Jarvis.
Incomplete.
yeah, J for Jarvis. Like, because sometimes I can say some things that can shock some people and kind of throw people off. So, I'm gonna go with that. I'm gonna go with a J because this doggone that 8th overall pick shocked a lot of folks. And my phone, I have the phone text messages and phone calls to prove it. So yeah, I'm going with a J.
Does the J like stand for something?
Jarvis. I meant to
I
myself.
was at least gonna give it like just waiting until they
There
play.
you go. There you go.
There you go, T. Yeah, we'll go with that.
Just hopeful enough to keep going.
I love it. Just hopeful enough to keep going.
Yes.
Oh gosh. Thank you guys for stopping by the Atlanta football party and just giving us an opportunity to share with you what we thought about the draft class because hey, it's your home for the best Atlanta football talk, including the Falcons 2024 draft class. Be sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we're free and available wherever you download your podcasts. We'll see you tomorrow on the Atlanta football party, the Dogs edition.